Hello and welcome to a very special episode of me talking at you. It is I, as always, ReActionExaminer, aka Tristan J. And today I'm going to be sharing some more PlayStation memories, not just of myself, but of some people that wrote into me, some friends, and they're going to be sharing, I'm going to be sharing their memories via some emails I got. And then at the end, I'm going to share some more PlayStation memories of myself, all in celebration of sending the PS3 to a fond farewell as the PlayStation 4 comes out in a few days. I just thought it was a very appropriate time to share some PlayStation memories. This past couple months, I've been sharing a lot of PlayStation memories on Examiner, writing quite a bit about them. But as you see here, I'm playing Crash Bandicoot 2 in the background, one of my favorite PlayStation 1 games, and just kind of like a mascot for PlayStation itself in the first era of when it was around. I'm not going to be talking about the game as I'm playing. I'm assuming I'm going to die a lot. It's been a long time since I played it. But, this game is like $5 on PSN, so I bought it, and it's still super fun, but also kind of hard in some places. So enjoy that as I'm talking to you about some memories here. So I'm going to give everyone nicknames, because I'm not quite sure if they want me to say their names or not. But I'm going to give everyone code names. And I think everyone is going to know who I'm talking about. So, okay. And a special thank you for sharing your memories with me so I can share them with the rest of the gaming universe. And so, yeah, let's begin here. This is from Sensei. My first experience with the PlayStation was playing Metal Gear Solid at my friend's house. I had an N64 at the time, so I had to go over there to play PlayStation games during middle school. After I got a job, the first thing I bought was a PS2 with surprisingly not a single PS2 game. I bought all the Final Fantasy games for the PS1 instead, including the collections with the old games and Chrono Trigger. Final Fantasy Tactics was easily my favorite. Eventually, I did buy a PS2 game, Metal Gear Solid 2, and eventually the PS2 collection went on to become my largest, but Bushido Blade 1 and 2 will always be my favorite PS1 games. I didn't get a PS3 until 2 years ago. I got it for Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and honestly, I don't own very many games for it. Most of what I have is free stuff from PlayStation Plus, which I just got a first free year of with buying a Vita last month. So yeah, I bought a Vita last month, and I think it's alright, but it's still not worth $200 because the game selection is terrible. Persona 4 Golden is the only game worth owning outside of Uncharted, and Golden is just a port of a PS2 game with some enhancements. It's really too bad, but every good Vita game ends up on PS3 as well. What I have been buying a ton of, though, is PSP games. Wow, that system had a goldmine of great games. I've been playing through those and really enjoying them. Overall, Sony systems have never had very many good exclusive titles. They're no Nintendo, but when it comes to the technical side of the machines, the only way to beat them is to play on PC. The Vita is also my cell phone right now. Who would have thought a video game console would be your cell phone? So, thank you, Sensei, for sharing with me. I agree. The Vita is kind of struggling, but I think eventually we'll get some stuff on there. But for now, it's nice to have all those really, really cheap PSP games on PSN right now, because I think the PSP is just an incredibly overlooked system, as I'll talk about myself when I go into my stories, but it's an excellent system, especially if you're a RPG nerd. Like this console generation, both Xbox 360 and PS3, and especially Wii, the JRPG scene there was some good games, but just nothing killer like the PS1 and PS2 era. But the PSP, there was a lot for those wanting an old school experience, so I highly recommend the PSP for those looking for that. But again, I'll get into that later. Alright, up next we have Blaze. My memories of the PlayStation started when Sony announced the system. I was in awe. First, that Sony would go against Nintendo and Sega. At first, I really didn't give in to the hype. I was a Nintendo fanboy at the time. My personal views was it was yet to be seen if it would be successful. My first experience was with Twisted Metal visiting my cousin in the Twin Cities. I was taken aback by the graphics and the response from the remote controller. I was surprised by the sheer fun I was having playing. Later that year, I stayed at a friend's house and became obsessed with Jet Moto. This quirky futuristic racing game was extremely addictive. This game sparked my interest in later racing games, including Wave 64 for the Nintendo 64. These experiences proved that the PlayStation was a phenomenon that I couldn't ignore. I finally broke down and bought one. I don't remember what my first game was for the system, but I distinctly remember having a sampler disc from PlayStation Underground that had Parappa the Rapper on it. A classic. The fondest memory I have is purchasing Parasite Eve and Final Fantasy VII. After seeing commercials and remembering Final Fantasies of old, I was very excited to start playing. Friends of mine came to visit and all we did was play Final Fantasy VII for hours on end, figuring out the Basilisk and Materia system together and watching the epic story as it unfolded. The amazing scene after Eris died where Cloud lifted her up from the water and my friends went crazy over Cid and our encounters with Sephiroth. These are some of my best memories and fondest memories surrounding the PlayStation that I will never forget. The weird thing is, I replayed Final Fantasy VII a bunch of times and didn't beat it until 2005, after 3 different copies and 2 different PlayStations. My desire to reminisce and play the game, and others, again still boils up in me to this day. With the recent Steam release of Final Fantasy VII for PC, I might have to indulge myself once again. I agree, Final Fantasy VII and all the Final Fantasies come in through a lot of these memories. I think the PlayStation was really the Final Fantasy system when you think about it. And Final Fantasy VII, like a lot of genres, like Skyrim. Skyrim was a game that crossed boundaries this generation, and everyone from just normal gamers, casual gamers, to hardcore gamers played it. And back in the day, Final Fantasy VII kind of brought the JRPG to the modern era with its, steampunk visuals and just kind of more modernist settings, and just, it just broke boundaries. So it's not hard to imagine why Final Fantasy VII is with a lot of these memories. Plus, I have a lot of RPG nerd friends, so I mean, that's just the kind of people I attract, I guess. But thank you for sharing, Blaze. This next one is from The Darkness. I frequently replay Final Fantasy VII through 9, Legend of Legaia 1 and 2, and occasionally Final Fantasy X. I've never replayed Final Fantasy X-2 though. These games had inferior graphics compared to the newer games out there today, but they were, and are, in my opinion, superior games to many of the others. They didn't use graphics as a crutch. I can get behind games like Tales of Vesperia, but they're more like throwbacks to gaming age of past. Graphics were secondary to the quality of the games themselves. I find it depressing when modern RPGs win for their visual effects on the back of their case instead of trying to sell you on the world and story they wish to immerse you in. I'm not saying that good RPGs are dead, I just feel that they've become fewer. I'm currently playing Magna Carta 2 for Xbox 360. I like it, but it's not the same. Record of Argus Wars will never be like the original Final Fantasy Tactics. I think better graphics have actually hurt RPGs. They're still epic, but not in the way that stays with you for a lifetime. I enjoy playing the newer ones, but it doesn't feel like the experience becomes part of who I am quite as often. The worst part is that I'm sure those games are out there. It's just that they aren't quite flashy or sharp enough to be imported. Instead, they sit in Japan and never make their way here in an official capacity. Makes me sad. Still, with most gamers only playing games like Call of Duty, Halo, which I do admit I love, and other first-person shooters, this is the problem that I feel is unnoticed by such exclusive jock kind of gamers. I never got a PSP, but I give serious props to PSP and Nintendo DS for re-releasing classics like Tactics. PS1 and PS2 RPGs are like classic rock. Some are ridiculous, but the great ones, well, they'll always be legendary. That turned into more of a rant about RPGs than the PlayStation itself, but thank you for writing in The Darkness. Yes, the PSP, as I said, and the Nintendo DS were kind of really the golden places to go this past generation, or even 2 generations ago. It's hard to where they fit in or whatever, but that's where the great RPGs were coming out of, and it's because they were the PS1 and PS2 kind of era graphics. I mean, Nintendo DS was more PS1 and the PSP was more PS2 kind of quality, but there were so many good things in there, and just, it was kind of expensive and inaccessible compared to like Nintendo's sensibility for everyone to be able to play on it. It had Mario, it had Nintendogs for everybody, it had Brain Age. Tons of people, both hardcore and casual gamers bought a DS, just like they bought a Wii, just because they're just games that just appeal to everybody on there. PSP not so much, but like for the hardcore RPG fans, I recommend the PSP again. And while I don't agree with everything he says, it is far and few between that great games come out for the new consoles. There have been some good ones, and some ones that I think get a bad rep. I don't think Final Fantasy XIII can live up to the old ones, but I do think that it doesn't get a fair shot. I think it's a good game, Not great, but I think it deserves more than it gets nowadays. And The recent release from this past January, Ni no Kuni, is harking back to both Final Fantasy crossed with Pokemon and Tales of series, and it's just awesome. It's probably the best old school RPG with newer aesthetics as well that came out in the few recent years, and it's the end of the PlayStation's console history. Which again, there'll be more games for PlayStation 3 coming out, but I don't know. I don't want to turn this into a rant after that, but yes, again, thank you for sharing Darkness, and I'll get more into myself later. Next up, we have X. There are two stories. One was when I started playing the PS1, and my first game was Wild Arms 2, which became one of my favorite games. That and Lunar: A Silver Star story. But Xenogears has probably had the biggest impact on me, because it literally affected how I view and believe in the world. I don't want this to turn into a preach fest, but that game made me question my core beliefs and helped me shape who I am. I first played Xenogears when I was still having a hard time making friends after a big move. The few friends I did have weren't that great. While Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy had come and left my life, Xenogears stayed. How many games can you say changed your mind about the world? It wasn't immediately, mind you. It was subtle and it happened slowly. But the scene that began, it was when Billy's father sacrificed himself after the bombshell that the man they worked for had been the reason behind his mother dying and the zombie creature that you fought in that portion of the game. He said something like, "You never needed a book or a church to know that God was always right there beside you." All that went off in my head, and it was like a bit of darkness that clouded me was lifted. I had stopped going to those church classes because after my grandfather died, it just didn't feel like it mattered. But this little bit of PlayStation history left a mark on me. And thank you for sharing, X. I think I love hearing stories about games that changed people's lives. Sometimes for the whole, sometimes in just philosophical beliefs and stuff like that, and others just maybe made them want to start covering games journalism. But thank you for sharing that story. I think Xenogears is a very wonky game, good RPG, very Christian overtones, and man, those Japanese love Christianity, and they love making it super weird. Xenogears and Evangelion are probably the two weirdest depictions of Christianity that Japan has made in the past, I guess, 20 years, 15, 10? They're old. They're very weird. I suggest you check out both those. Next, Hanska writes in, and she has 5 stories about 5 separate games. I will number it off and let you know when the next one is coming up. Number 1. One of the games I remember sticking with the most was Final Fantasy X when it first came out for the PS2, and seeing the pictures and screen caps and magazines and just being blown away about how they looked. And even now, I remember when I first played it, being in all of 7th grade and not being able to tell what was CG and what was gameplay. It was one of the best looking games I had ever played at the time, and one of the first games that really sucked me in for 100 plus hours. Number 2. I'd been hearing all this hype about this game called Journey, and finally was like, hell, I had cash to burn, so I logged into the PSN and downloaded it. Well, with a shitty internet connection that took me about 6 hours till 11 p.m., it finally was complete. I had work the next morning, but I was like, I just wanted to test it out, and experience some of the most meaningful multiplayer content that I had ever seen. 2 hours later, I didn't care about work, and all that mattered was me and my little journey buddy struggling up a mountain, giving each other encouragement with chirps. The whole game was probably the closest I've ever come to religious or spiritual experience in my life. The bond that I felt like I formed with a partner, even though I had no idea who they were and I couldn't speak to them outside of chirps, and it felt like I belonged. And it felt like a really good multiplayer experience I had ever, experienced. Journey is definitely one of my top memories of PS systems and in gaming in general. Number 3. The Uncharted series from Game 1 was always a favorite. I could play it over and over again without tiring of it. As what I considered somewhere between casual and active gamer, I took pride in managing to beat 2 of them on crushing difficulty. But my best memory of them was when I brought them over to a friend's. She wanted to play them but couldn't seem to get too far in them, and started Friday and ended Sunday. We marathoned our way through all 3 of them, me behind the controls and her giving me avid commentary. And just being blown away by how well the first one was, and still how it holds up. And how even though I was playing it, I felt more like it was marathoning a film series. It was great. Number 4. Resident Evil 5 as a Resident Evil game was so actiony compared to survival horror, but its multiplayer functions, well, let's just say I'm not sure I managed to get anything done my senior year of college. My roommate and I played that almost every night, unlocking everything we could. We still laugh now, 4 years later, about some of the shenanigans and inside jokes we came up with in that game. Number 5. I bought Dead Space years ago, though I actually only finished it recently. But that has some of the scenes that sticks to me throughout my gaming years, nearly 4 years later. It's from the beginning when you're exploring the Ishimura and you hear this banging, and as you turn the corner you see a crew member banging his head against a wall, and as you get closer he completely brains himself. And it was the most unsettling, creepy thing I remember seeing in a video game. And at 2 in the morning I promptly shut off my PS3. And subsequent years and subsequent games later, that has stuck with me. Hanskar, thank you so much for sharing all those memories. I like how there was one PS2 game and the rest were PS3 games. But hey, a very great way to show the appreciation of the PlayStation 3, ending its long 7-year history on this planet and in gaming gamers' hearts. I agree. Journey was an awesome game. Final Fantasy X was an awesome game. Love the Uncharted series. I actually have a story myself about Resident Evil 5. And Dead Space, if you don't like the Resident Evil 5 and 6, what they became, go to Dead Space 1 and 2, and that's close enough to Resident Evil 4 that you could probably get. Super survival horror-y and super action at the same time, but it'll really be a good balance in between. Those games are awesome. Dead Space 3 kind of suffers what Resident Evil 5 and 6 had become. But anyway, let's move on to the last contributor here, who has a very short little story here. Let's call him Mecha. So Mecha says, we play the crap out of Twisted Metal and the Medal of Honor series. Lots of LAN parties with Twisted Metal. So there you go. Thank you for sharing, Mecha. LAN parties, pretty crazy, I guess, back in the day. But I do like the original Medal of Honor series. That's really one of the first few first-person console games that I've ever experienced. And, before the whole Call of Duty age. Never really got into Twisted Metal. I actually played Vigilante 8, which is kind of basically a rip-off of Twisted Metal, quite a bit back in the PlayStation era. And I did enjoy that quite a bit. But yeah, again, Mecha, thank you for helping me out. Now it's time for me to share some of my memories. So I'm not going to get into too much of the PS1. I have talked a lot about it in my articles and stuff like that, and I've covered PS2 as well. But I want to get a little bit more love to the PSP, which is the first console, or handheld console I should say, that I bought since the Game Boy Color. I had a Game Boy Advance from a friend, but I really didn't play it that much. So I bought it, I think about 2 years after it came out. I got Jeanne d'Arc, which is a level 5 strategy RPG, Daxter, the spin-off to Jak and Daxter, and it was the white PSP with Darth Vader on the back, and it came with a new Battlefront game, Battlefront Rebellion Squadron? Boy, I can't remember what the name of it was. But I bought it and for a birthday present to myself, and then I continued to play it as I bought it. I think I skipped class. I was in the commons of my community college years before I went to the University of Minnesota Duluth, and I just played the shit out of that thing. I was just blown away. One, by just how amazing a portable was, because I hadn't played, again, a portable for a really long time, and the game selection is sadly overlooked. But my most memorable memory is actually a sad memory. It was when I went to UMD. I was sitting on the top bunk playing the PSP. I leaned it against the railing, which I thought was secure, because I think someone came to the door. I had to go down to grab something. Anyway, I left it in that little nook, and I went down, and boom, it slid right out of the little hole, right to the ground, exploded. Now, the system itself works fine. I still have it, but the analog stick, or nub really, just doesn't work anymore. So, I mean, that kind of sucks. But let's skip ahead to the PS3 era and show some more modern memories. So I remember buying Super Stardust HD and Quest for Booty, a Ratchet & Clank game, and just being able to download games just was just awe-inspiring to me. I remember doing it at my sister's apartment because I was visiting her for the summer, and I had just bought the PS4 a few months ago, and just the first time I was able to hook up to the internet, and I was just wow. I mean, it was incredible. I also remember borrowing Uncharted 2 from a friend, beat it in 2 days, skipped a bunch of classes at UMD again, and then I gave it back to the friend who had bought it that day, and she had a paper due, and I was like, hey, how about I play this game first? And she's like, okay, and then, yeah, I did that. I also did that for Heavy Rain as well. Beat that really fast, and then I went to my first anime con a few months later, and I went to a panel on it, and just made Heavy Rain cement in my brain just how goofy and fun it was, and just yelling Jason in the halls at this convention was just truly, truly fun. I do remember playing Resident Evil 5 as well. I was at a friend's house. We rented it. He had never played a Resident Evil game before, and we just sat down and played it an entire night in the span of, gosh, I don't know, 10 hours, maybe even less than that, but we stayed up until the very end, and it was truly, truly amazing. Frightening experience. The same friend, I stand in line for the first time ever for midnight release of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, and Modern Warfare 2 was like at the peak for me. It was the first game I stood in line for, first online multiplayer I really just dove into, and it was just amazing. I just cannot... There's not a better Call of Duty out there for me. I mean, personally, just because I have attached memories. Another thing is, I bought an HD TV with Little Big Planet 2 and Mass Effect 2. I've never played Mass Effect before. That was the first one. It came to the PlayStation. And as for Little Big Planet 2, I loved the first one. And I sat down with a girl who hasn't played a lot of games. And she sat down and played with me for just weeks and weeks. And it's just so much fun. Even though she thought she wasn't that good of it, she was pretty decent. And it was just, an awesome time and an awesome memory of that game and of the PS3. So, those are some of my memories. Hope you enjoyed this video. Read my PlayStation Rewind articles. Tune in here as always for more great stuff. And PlayStation 3, I bid you a fond farewell. Even though you won't be dying anytime soon.